I would declare a conflict of interest, as these people are listed on my register of gifts from previous term of council. So I'll vacate the chair, though I don't need to. I decide to do that of my own volition, and I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair for the next 3 items.
Okay, councillors, 11.3.6. Can I have a mover for that one, please? Thank you, Councillor Tolte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move item 11.3.6 as recommended by the officers, MCU 013526.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Gleeson. Okay, we'll stay with the fors and against. If councillors want to go into informal conversation, I'll allow that. But is there, Councillor Tolte, would you like to? No, if you go into against, then I'll. Okay. Is there a speaker for?
Back of the room.
So you'd like to go into informal?
I think we should. Just information I've read last night and things like that.
Okay, Councillor Elliott, are you happy to move a motion to suspend standing orders? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Bishop. All in favour? 1, 2, 3. Okay, those in favour? Councillor Bishop, Councillor Gleeson, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Hewlett, Councillor Golay, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Boglari. Those against? Councillor Tolte. So that's moved. So I'll ask the office. Oh, she's already down here. Thank you. Emma and David are here. Councillor Elliott, would you like to ask your question, please?
Here we go. Oh, they'll hear me. Just on the Southeast Thornlands structure plan overlay, there's 4. I'm just trying to find it again. Sorry, councillors. The 4 criteria. Sorry, guys. This is long and wheeling the old planning expenditure. The in 5.14.7, the overall outcomes, it says in 2, the overall outcomes sought by South East Thornlands Structure Plan Overlay Code are described in 4 key: land use precinct, movement network, land use conflict mitigation and infrastructure. So that's the overall outcome. I'm just wondering why the applicant hasn't addressed with the adjacent park residential in the specific outcomes. It says 1,200 square metres with a 25 metre frontage. Why isn't that addressed in this application?
So we believe it has been addressed. So the land use mitigation component of the overall outcomes is the corresponding overall outcome in relation to that specific outcome. So I haven't got a copy of exactly what it says in front of me, but that is the assessment that we undertook to determine whether or not land use mitigation with an alternative approach to the 1,200 square metres and minimum 25 metre wide provision would be acceptable and still achieve the overall outcome. So that is the approach that we took, and we determined that their proposal did meet the overall outcome.
So it doesn't matter on the specific outcomes. And I know the plan, they're 50 metre blocks and things like that. But to have a specific thing say there, and I read it again, and when I saw the full character, it's not like it's it specifically says this land use mitigation, that when you're right beside a block, it's got its own little box, I think it's S3.3. It actually says that. And if there was nothing there, fine, we'd go with the probable. But I just find it bizarre, the more I've looked at this, that we can't, and I'm happy. Look, I'd like to give them a development permit, but address the specific. I think it's S3.3.
Emma,
I don't want to stop the development, but I'd like to give them an approval.
Specific.
Sorry, Emma. David just had his hand up. That was also just seeing what he had to contribute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought it might be worth just actually reading out the words, the overall outcome in the planning scheme, what it says, and as Emma says, how it's been assessed. So the wording is, uses and other development achieve a higher standard of amenity by mitigating potential conflicts and impacts between new residential uses and existing dwelling houses on park residential zoned land adjoining the structure plan area. So what the applicant is required to do is consider how they mitigate the potential conflicts and impacts. This proposal before Council addresses that, officers believe, by providing 50-metre deep blocks and by imposing a condition that says there can be no buildings within 10 metres of that boundary to the adjoining residential properties. We would say that is a solution which mitigates those potential conflicts and impacts, therefore complies with the overall outcome.
Okay, because I'll be S3.3 says one, uses and other development are designed and located to protect the amenity of dwelling houses on the existing lots included in the park residential zone. I have a problem with this. We have a specific outcome, yet if there was no specific outcome, yeah, fine, I'd accept that. And I struggle with this. And then it goes, included in the park residential zone by A, requiring reconfiguration of the land involving the creation of any new lots directly adjoining the park residential zone to achieve a minimum of 1, site area of 1,200 and 2, a frontage of 25 metres. And then it goes on B, it just says restricting the establishment of dual occupancies and multiple dwellings on newly created lots which directly adjoin existing park residential zone lots. I just struggle with that. That is a specific thing, you know. I've always led to believe the specific outcomes we could just about hang our hats on, and then it's not like it's, you know, you can do it in performance base, but when you've got a specific outcome, you should address it, I would have thought.
Emma, could you maybe just also explain how, even though this is one whole development, we are voting on it in 3 stages today, and the lots down that western side are only included in 2 stages? It's not in every stage as well. I just want clarification on all of that, and then also address Councillor Elliott's concerns.
Yeah, so through the Chair, the current item that's for consideration is the townhouse development, which doesn't involve any, it doesn't adjoin any park residential lots, so it doesn't, that issue doesn't come into the assessment of this MCU. But in relation to the specific outcomes are non-mandatory criteria. They are a higher level with higher weight than a probable solution, but they're not mandatory. And it's for that reason that not complying with a specific outcome doesn't actually constitute a conflict with the planning scheme or with the code. If it doesn't comply with it, that's the entire point of having an overall outcome. The overall outcome is really setting what the objective of that area is. And so that's why if there's non-compliance with a specific outcome, we're required to assess it against the overall outcomes. And that's exactly what we've done in this case, and why we think that an approval is warranted, despite conflicting with a specific outcome.
Councillor Hewlett has also, I think, got some comments on that particular one, if that's okay. Councillor Elliott,
yeah,
yep.
I'm finished on that. I'd like to come back on another that David Jean sent to us this morning as well.
Okay. Is this concerning that particular section of it? Or will we...
I just thought if we're going to ask about, there's 3 applications here on the same development. I thought we'd get the questions out of the way in this one so we don't have to keep going to informal for the following 3 applications.
Yeah, no, the CEO has said that...
Am I speaking to you, Councillor Talty?
Okay,
guys, can we please...
Stop her butting in, please.
We have suspended it. I will ask no one for comments that have not come through the chair once you have been addressed and you have the floor. I have asked the CEO comments on all 3 because they are closely related agenda items can be discussed now. So, like Councillor Elliott has asked that question, which was more referred to the other 2, but that is okay. We'll get all the questions out now, so then we just have this once. And I'm asking now, are there any more questions concerning the left-hand side, or the western side of any of these? Is it concerning that? Because we'll get one concern out of the way as we go, if that's all right. So we'll address these now, which is the western blocks that are adjoining the park residential. Was your question relating to that one?
Yes, it was.
Okay, please continue.
My question goes back to the very inception of this structure plan. If the council, I assume of the day in 2006 when this structure plan was done, surely there was community consultation, surely there were promises made to the residents in that local area about how this plan was going to come together. And obviously, community consultation is supposed to be the cornerstone of what we do in this council as far as development goes, and yet we have an application here and we haven't even considered that consultation. We've gone out and told residents, these park resident registers obviously believe you're going to have 1,200 square metre lots right next to you with 25 metre frontages, which will help mitigate looking over a sea of roofs, which potentially they will be now with these small 600 and less lots. So I just want to know, can David probably explain to me how a structure plan works, because I'm baffled that we can even consider those small lots when the structure plan was consulted, put into print, signed off by 2 state ministers, and here we are altering that structure plan. How does that work?
Regardless of whether it's a structure plan or the city more broadly, this is the planning scheme. We have to assess every application against the planning scheme. A planning scheme in its entirety and a structure plan go through public consultation. That informs the drafting of that document. We have to assess against that document, and there is a hierarchy within the codes within that document, as Emma has explained. The overall outcomes are the purpose of the code, and that's where we come back to, yes, there's a specific outcome that says 1,200 square metres. If you comply with that provision, you're deemed to have met the overall outcome. You are deemed to have mitigated the impact on those residents. But non-compliance with that doesn't necessarily constitute a conflict, as Emma has said. We still have to consider the overall outcome, which seeks to achieve that the impacts and potential conflicts are mitigated. An applicant has a right to propose a solution to that, as they have in this case, with that 50-metre deep lot, and a condition that we have recommended to say no buildings within 10 metres. We would say that that would mitigate the conflicts, and we're required to assess against that criteria. Yes, the public consultation is important in actually crafting the scheme. We have to assess against the code as drafted.
So, in your opinion, the applicant has mitigated looking out over those sea of roofs by putting a 10-metre tree buffer on their property, which will more than likely be cut down over years, so they'll have no buffer there. So I'm just imagining living in one of those big acreage houses, looking over. If I thought there were 1,200 square metre lots there with 25 metre frontages, I'd be okay with that, because I'd be looking at a lot of green space. No, I'm just saying.
No, when a point of order's been called, you have to stop. What's your point of order, Councillor?
The council needs to stick to the item at hand, Madam Mayor, not what may or may not happen down the track. That's only here, so it's not based on fact. It's not based on fact or evidence, Madam Chair.
Okay, can we actually? Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. Please keep to the planning grounds. It's exactly right. We cannot foresee. And no, the emotion in that isn't. Yeah. We need planning grounds.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. What concerns me is the planners are telling us that the specific outcome to me is higher order than a probable solution. Usually we get that excuse with a probable solution or an acceptable outcome. It's a tick and flick. Now we're getting told the specific outcome means nothing. And I just can't accept that. I can't accept that a specific outcome is of no value if they can address a conflict which I don't agree with, the way they've addressed it. So, to me, we're letting the community down. This has been consulted. It's been signed off by a state minister, the structure plan, and here we are allowing the developer not recommending the developer be allowed 600 square metre lots where there's supposed to be 1,200. I won't be supporting it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hewlett. Is there anybody who needs clarification on a point while we're in informal to speak to the officers, to ask the officers? Councillor Golay, you had a question previously.
I don't have a question, and I'm not sure of the protocols here. It's more observations, things that I, as a new councillor, have picked up on. So, first of all, I mean no disrespect to any officers. Councillor
Golly, I'm going to ask you to seek clarification, questions, and speak to the item.
Well, can I speak to the item? Yes. Okay. So, straight off the bat, if we look at page 38, it just comes up straight away. Although the proposed use does not comply with the intent of the Medium Density Residential Zone Code and the South East Thornlands Structure Plan Overlay Code, it's considered there are sufficient grounds to justify the decision despite the conflict. So here we've got two pieces of documentation that say it's in conflict. Then we move on to the specific outcomes. It's in conflict with that, but that's still not good enough to bring it into order. The primary concern here is that people have bought 6,000 square metre lots to establish a livable amenity in that area. And the hypothetical is that, well, one day they might be able to subdivide so it won't really matter. Well, that's not good enough. We've already heard, or from my community, who have said, we want you to advocate independently on our behalf to see if we can get better outcomes for the city. And from my perspective, this is not a better outcome.
At the moment, we're in informal. You can argue the point when we go into formal, when we're going for and against. I've just allowed this for clarification or questions on it.
Right.
Councillor Hewlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just received further information. In the South East Thornlands Structure Plan, it says in 5.14.3, Section 2, the South East Thornlands Structure Plan Overlay Code only assesses assessment criteria specific to the South East Thornlands area that are not adequately dealt with by other parts of the Redlands Planning Scheme. In all circumstances, reference must be made to the relevant zone codes and any other overlay or material change of use or any other development may trigger. Should any case arise where provisions of the South East Thornlands Structure Plan Overlay Code are in conflict with another code in the Redlands Planning Scheme, the specific outcomes and probable solutions in the 5.14.8 of the South East Structure Plan will take precedence. So does that say that the specific outcomes take precedence?
No, what that means is that they take precedence over the applicable zone code, so the equivalents in those zone codes. So it's where, so for example, there are zones that apply to the land as well as precincts that apply to the land under the overlay. And so what that means is that the overlay has a higher level of importance than the zone itself. So for example, the zone applies throughout the city, and so it has very generic kind of standards that can apply to any site that is zoned MDR or like urban residential zone. Whereas with the overlay, because it's very site specific to this particular area, it sets more particular standards. So where there's any inconsistency between what a zone code says needs to apply to that land and what the overlay needs to apply to that land, the overlay takes precedence. So that's what that statement is clarifying, is that the overlay takes precedence over the zone code, and so that's the reference that's being made.
The way that I would read it is that area is obviously UR zone, is that correct? So you can go to lots, in the Greenfield site, you can go to lots 350 square metres. Why wouldn't you go for 350s?
In this case, you wouldn't go for 350 because the overlay has identified that there is an alternative provision in this case.
Which is a specific outcome.
It is a specific outcome, but it doesn't change the interpretation of a code. So the interpretation of the code has the same levels. It has a probable solution, specific outcome and an overall outcome. It's constructed in the same way, and so you take the same interpretation in terms of any non-compliance. It's just identifying that there are more site-specific criteria in an overlay code than there is in the zone code, and therefore where there's any inconsistency between those two parts of the scheme, the overlay supersedes the zone.
Well, the way I read it is that the UR zone is 350. This says that specifically in the specific outcome they've got to be 1,200 square metre lots, and it should take precedence. That's how I read it. So, anyway, thank you.
Is there any more clarification? Councillor Tolty, then Councillor Elliott.
I move we return to standing orders. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Tolty has moved a motion to return to standing orders. Councillor Gleeson has seconded it. I know that you have another clarification or question, whatever. You're happy for that to happen before we move the motion? Thank you, Councillor Tolty.
Thank It's always on. Yeah, Councillor, just your attention, David sent us an email at 9:26 regarding the shading of the windows yesterday, and I'm just asking through you to Councillor Tell that we could include that in the recommendation of its as an amendment.
I believe it's already.
Is it in there?
David, could you just speak to that for clarification? Yesterday, Councillor Elliott had a issue with the design element of the apartment buildings, which he discussed with you. I haven't seen that email myself, so other councillors mightn't have either. If you could please just clarify it, please.
Yeah, thank you. I haven't
No. David, could you please speak to it? One conversation, please, guys, and the officer will now speak.
Yep. Councillor Elliott just raised some concern about the appearance of some of the buildings which would be fronting onto public roads in their development. We had another look at that. We believe that what's proposed does comply with the probable solution. However, we believe that it wouldn't be an unreasonable imposition to impose a condition just for some minor design changes or a new facade to be lodged. We've sent through a condition that would meet that intent, and that could simply be added to the end of the conditions package before council to consider.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Elliott?
Yes, it does. Thanks through you to David. Thanks very much. And I just heard Julie mention that she was going to raise that as well.
Okay, thank you. Can I also just seek some clarification on this first item, which is 11.3.6? I don't know whether we can bring up that page at all on the screen. But I'll the one that shows the townhouse, which is the first one, 11.3.6. The one that shows the zonings. Oh no, it's one of the maps. Sorry, one of the diagrams. Yeah. I will show you that one. Oh. I just wanted clarification. This actual stage of this development is over 2 zonings, with a communal open space being in the middle due to open space that was put there. To me, that open space in the middle is superfluous to this, and I would have preferred it elsewhere, but that apparently cannot happen. But I also wanted it explained why we are allowing higher density in the northern part of that area compared to the southern part. My understanding is if full density of the southern part was allowed, it would be 4 stories, which I agree I feel inappropriate to that area. So we've allowed some higher density in the top part, so it is a more appropriate and better planning for that stage of the development. Can I just have that clarified, because we've just been talking. Yep. Because we've just been talking about changing different densities in the area, and I think I'd like this one explained in particular, because it's actually for a better community outcome.
So during the course of the assessment, the applicants were asked to address a couple of constraints in relation to the land. So specifically the topography, it's pretty steep in parts of that site, so there's quite substantial retaining structures that are required. Also access in terms of waste management, in terms of waste services, as well as ensuring that the units actually address the streetscape. There will be a shared use bicycle path and footpath that runs along that proposed new road that's on the bottom part of that screen, and so we felt that having units that also present to the street provides a better kind of casual surveillance and security and things like that. So there were a number of assessment items to consider, and in doing so actually required that the density of the development was reduced in one part and shared over the 2 stages of development. So for that reason, it's slightly less development on one part and slightly more development on the other part, but it means that we have a better outcome in terms of those constraints of the site.
Okay, so before we move out of the informal, were there any other clarification, or we will then move on to item 11. Once we vote to go out of it, we'll then move on to 11.3.6, and I would prefer if we can resist going back into informal. So is there any more clarification needed now on any points? Okay, so Councillor Tolte has put the motion that we move back into formal. It was seconded by Councillor Gleeson. I will put that vote now, please. All in favour? Passed unanimously. So now we're back on to 11.3.6. We're back into formal discussion. What do we do first, for or against?
Julie will speak.
Julie, you haven't spoken yet. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Is there a formal speaker against now, please? Councillor Hewlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other issue that I wanted to raise, Murray brought my attention to the overall outcomes being infrastructure. And I assume that means the adequate provision of infrastructure. The infrastructure that I'm concerned about is state infrastructure, which is the lights at the intersection.
Point of order, Madam Chair. This is not relevant to the
it's
application
related to the South East Thornlands structure plan. Can you please ask Councillor Todd to stop interrupting?
I'll let him continue because there is an impact of traffic on that road. I'm addressing the point of order. Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. There is going to be an increase of traffic on that road. So infrastructure, including lights, is a point that he can argue. So, Councillor Hewlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's actually stated in the South East Thornlands structure plan that those lights are supposed to be installed when this development came on. I think Emma tried at length to get the State Department of Main Roads to insist that it be, if I'm correct, that those lights be installed. The thing that concerns me is the safety of everyone that crosses that road. It's Boundary Road's a 4-lane road, as you know. People from this estate have got an option of turning left at the bottom and doing a U-turn up the road to get down to Victoria Point, or they go out through the Affinity Estate next door or Meadowlands Road on the other side, both which have crossings across that main road, but there's no signalling at those intersections either. So, look, and I drew attention to places like Anita Street and Giles Road, which is getting lights, where there's been fatalities and bad accidents, and we're proceeding with these developments without any main road infrastructure. I don't know why we should be approving it without it, personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a speaker for?
Madam Chair, could we have an officer answer the comment from the councillor, please?
Emma or David? Emma, thank you.
Through the chair. The difficulty we have in relation to refusing an application on the basis of inadequacy of state infrastructure is that we don't have the jurisdiction over that area. The state assessed the application against their own codes and considered the impact of the development on their infrastructure and whether or not it necessitated an upgrade. They determined that it wouldn't necessitate an upgrade at this stage. There's still future development that will occur on the northern side of Boundary Road that would take access from that same point. So it may be that in the future they determine that application brings on the need to deliver that infrastructure. But at this point in time, the state advised that they were satisfied that the infrastructure provided by the developer was sufficient to cater for the impact that they would be generating. So we're in a difficult position in the sense that the state has assessed the application. They've determined that the impact is acceptable and that the arrangements proposed by the applicant are acceptable. And they've put conditions on the applicant in accordance with that and the way that they have to design that intersection to ensure that it is appropriate for an 80-kilometre posted road. And so from our perspective, we wouldn't be able to refuse the application on that basis unless we had very clear evidence suggesting that there was a significant safety concern. And all of the expert evidence we've had to date has suggested that it would be okay.
Just a question, Emma. So when the state obviously haven't deemed that a signalled intersection is necessary, can they impose that cost on the developer, or is that something the Department of Main Roads would have to provide?
Yeah, it becomes their cost effectively. If that effectively is required in the future and they haven't required that it's been provided by a developer, it will be something that they'll have to deliver in time.
They can put that on the developer if they chose to.
If it was necessary to service their site, they would be able to require it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Elliott, your microphone's on. Okay. Speaker 4. A question, Councillor Gleeson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just question through you to the officers. Being off Boundary Road, State Government Road, this development would have gone through to TMR for referral at some point, and they would have assessed the need for traffic lights in regards to this development application, which is all we're judging on today. We're not judging on future applications down the track. We're being asked to vote on this particular development. Everything else is irrelevant, but I'd like to just confirm that Department of Transport and the State Government would have assessed the need for traffic lights based on this development application.
I think that's
just been addressed.
Yeah, Emma just said that.
Yes, I can confirm that.
So
yep.
Yes, Councillor.
Yes, Councillor. Is there a speaker against? Well, I'll just take Councillor Golly being the divisional councillor speaking against, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Hughes, for your question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If I could just continue from before, referring to page 38, if we start looking at the conflicts straight away, I've already addressed page 38. If I move on to page 40, which looks at the state planning policy and regulatory provision, it says there, the site is located within an accessible area under the South East Queensland Koala Conservation SPRP and is within a koala broad hectare area. Division 3 of the SPRP applies. It then goes on further to say, Division 3 requires the development designed to incorporate movement corridors and food species for koalas. Then goes on to say, the SPRP requirements are considered to be met through the provision of movement corridors via street tree planting, in particular along the Boulevard Road, which benefits from the extra wide verges delivered as part of ROL 005951 and the buffer planting to the site frontage. It then goes on to say, it's not considered appropriate for koala trees to be planted in these areas as it would attract koalas in the area, which could put them at risk of attack from domestic animals and being struck by vehicles. The final species for planting will be determined as part of the operational work stage of the development. So in one step we've got, in the state planning policy, it says make those provisions and we're going to meet that provision, and then the next sentence it says we're not going to enforce it. If I go into page 41.
Excuse me, Councillor Golly, would you like that addressed by officers, please? And
well, I'd like to highlight...
Wait a minute, Councillor Golly. Can I also... this is a very controversial, apparently, and emotional application. Can I please ask councillors not to speak while another councillor is speaking, and also the gallery, so that we can make sure that we actually hear what is being said and get any further information that we need. Councillor Golly, would you like that address, please?
If I could just continue, that would be fine. So if I look at page 41, it says, again, State Planning Policy, April 2016. So, C, a high ecological significance wetland. That's not addressed. A, koala bushland. Now, if I go to koala bushland, and that's been addressed, and then I go back to the previous page, it actually says we're not really addressing it. We're going to plant, but we're not really going to plant. And it's just, if I look at it from the perspective of what are we trying to achieve here as a city in regards to the outcomes, I would refer back to a better outcome for the city would be to look at the 2004, and I acknowledge that it's an old application that's since lapsed. The 2004 application was to have it zoned as park residential, which would meet the amenity.
Councillor Golly, when a point of order has been called, Councillor Golly, the speaker has to end. Councillor Tolty, the point of order was?
The comments being made are in regard to a past application that has since lapsed and has no relevance whatsoever to the item in front of us now.
Councillor Golly, I understand why you have mentioned it, but Councillor Tolty's point is accurate.
The relevance is, Madam Chair, is that it's in this report. It's been listed that a past application had it zoned as park residential, which would be a more appropriate outcome to that area given the acreage lots that it's adjoining.
Would you like an officer to address that, to speak to that point?
I would, please, Madam Chair.
David or Emma, please.
Can I just clarify exactly which points? Because there's probably a couple
Councillor
of things
Golly,
to clarify.
can you just clarify your point, please, for the officer?
It's more along the lines of my address. I'm not actually seeking to have my points clarified. I'm actually speaking against this development on what I believe and what the community believes is not the best outcomes for the city. And I'm pointing out in the report that there is conflict upon conflict, and that in the opinion of the community and my opinion as their representative, that the park acreage lots are more suitable to the amenity of the acreage lots that are adjoining that western boundary. Look, no one is going to accept a 4-storey lot or 4-storey building in the middle of a paddock in a greenfield site. Okay, so of course that's not appropriate. But what is appropriate is what the community is asking for, which is to have a backyard. And this doesn't really meet that.
Point of order, Madam Chair. This is a latitude that really is
That
not
is usually
within
given,
standing
thank you,
orders.
Councillor Tolty, it's usually given to the divisional councillor who is representing the people of that actual local area. Leniency is often given to the divisional councillor. Councillor Golly, please make your points.
Yep, okay, well, I'll continue on. The UR Zone Code, page 42, clarifies that the probable solution for residential development density in the zone is 1 unit per 400 square metres. The density of stage 1, including part of the open space zone area, is 1 unit and 238 metres squared, which does not comply with the probable solution. My point is we've, and this is with all due respect to the officers, because I'm sure they did their best to
Madam
mitigate.
Chair, could we have that point clarified by an officer?
Can we have those densities please clarified, Emma? Thank you.
I think I partially covered this with the previous question in terms of
It's on page 42.
in terms of the fact that there are 2 zonings over this one development application, and one part of the site is less dense than the prescribed probable solution, and the other part is more dense than the prescribed probable solution, and that the overall balance of development is in line with what was intended by the planning scheme.
Which would probably format the reason why 3 separate applications were made and not 1. My point is that I was put in this position to seek better outcomes for the city and for the division that I'm representing. I can't support this development because, in my view, there is too many anomalies, too many conflicts, and it is going to take away from the amenity of the acreage lots that are already in place. Now, yesterday I raised a comment which was perceived as an insult to officers. I know that if I purchase for a lifestyle block, I would not want to see townhouses or smaller lots right on my boundary, irrespective of how many buffers were put there. And with all due respect, I just cannot support this application as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Golay. Is there a speaker for? Okay, for comments, I've got Councillor Hughes first, Councillor Gleeson, then Councillor Edwards. Thank you.
My comment may come at the end. I'm just seeking clarification when we get to the officer's recommendation of what we're actually moving, because it's saying it's simultaneous approval with the other 2 developments, and I'm a little concerned that if we're moving this one piece, the recommendation is saying that's in line with the other 2. So I'm seeking a clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Can you please just give clarification on the recommendation?
Yep. So the reason that the recommendation is tied or dependent on another approval is that ROL 005951 is the one that creates the access road. The way that our the assessment and the conditions are drafted is assuming that access is taken from the road that's actually created by another application. So for that reason, the recommendation on this application is dependent on the other approval. So that's the reason for that link.
So I feel that potentially you're asking me to vote on something that is dependent on something that we haven't discussed.
So we're voting on the... Can we have the plan on the board, please, that shows... there's a map somewhere that has all 3 applications.
That was in the presentation.
That was in a presentation, sorry. We saw that yesterday.
There's an attachment for ROL 005951. The ROL plan stage 7 does actually show the areas we're talking about.
Thank you, Emma.
Madam Chair, would it not clarify it if the officers just explain that simultaneous means that they can't build the units before they build the road?
I was going to ask the officers to point this out once we had that up. Thanks, Councillor Tolty. So, Emma, would you mind coming forward and actually explain how we've got the 3 lots and what connection they have and how that in relation to is actually applied, please?
So the MCU is lodged over both of these. So the MCU is lodged over both of these balance lots, which are actually created by this first subdivision. So that's the reason that the recommendation for this application is linked to this, on the basis that this road, this access road, is created by this lot itself. So there are conditions that have been proposed that require that this can't proceed until that access is provided. But yeah, it was something that we've put in the recommendation as well, just to shore that up.
Yes, thank you, David.
So, councillors, condition or recommended condition number 4 on this MCU approval says that the building and operational works cannot commence until the survey plan that registers the road and the lots has been brought forward. So if councillors were to choose not to approve that subdivision, then this approval couldn't occur. One is dependent on the other, but your decision on this one doesn't fetter your discretion on those future applications. You can still decide all 3 applications independently, but this one cannot commence unless and until those lots are created.
I feel potentially we're voting on the officer's recommendation for the first issue, the ROL that we're dealing with now. The other 2 then become, if we vote for the first one, we voted for the other 2 without discussion.
No, that's not the... I'll seek clarification there, but...
Well, if it gets through...
You can then. We will then be discussing the others fully, and we have. I'll let David answer it. He's the.
As I just said, this approval, should council grant it, requires that the lots are created through another subdivision application. If council were to not approve that subdivision application, this approval couldn't be implemented. So they are separate decisions, and you can make a decision on this one. Separate to the 2 subdivision applications. You can choose to refuse the subdivision applications, for example, and that would simply mean this approval couldn't be implemented. But you're not binding yourselves into a decision on those other applications.
Are you satisfied? Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Gleeson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I too would like to make a comment and wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Golly, and I'd love to see park res everywhere. I think it's fantastic. I'd love to go out in the community and say, I can't vote for this because it's not park res and that's not what you want. But the reality is the zonings and the master plannings of South East Thornlands was done through between the periods of 2004 and 2012 councils, and we don't have a choice in this. The property owner have development rights. If we don't like what we're being shown, we have to compensate them financially for loss of income or potential loss of income.
Point of order, I think that's incorrect.
Can I have clarification on that? No, sorry, Councillor Golly. There's been a point of order called. David or Emma, sorry.
If council chose to, you could seek to amend the planning scheme to remove the urban residential and medium density residential zonings and go back to a park residential zoning. However, I think it's unlikely that the planning minister would agree to such a change, given the location of the site. Even if it were approved to go back to a park residential type zoning, an applicant would still have 1 year in which to lodge an application under the current planning scheme. If council were to refuse to assess it under that current planning scheme and the development was refused, then there could be a potential compensation claim for loss of development rights. The difference in value between current zoning and new zoning. So it's,
David,
potential.
Sorry, David, the application we are actually addressing at the moment, though, isn't under that zoning, is it? We are addressing the townhouse application at the moment, which is not the park residential zoning, is it?
So we shouldn't even be having this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Tolty. So, Councillor Gleeson, has that addressed it? We are not doing the park residential one at the moment. We are doing the unit.
Madam Chair, I'll make a comment.
Comment?
As was made before, that I don't particularly like these sort of developments either. but we have no choice. We have to make our judgment based on fact and remove the emotion from it. And one of our big considerations that we have to take in on this type of application is, where do we stand? Is what they're doing legal, and is it defendable in court? Do we potentially waste ratepayers' money, or do we actually stand up and make the occasional tough decision? It's not all fun in here all the time. Some of these decisions have got to be made, and you've got to determine sometimes whether you're potentially prepared to waste ratepayers' money or listen to the expert planner's advice and accept the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gleeson. Councillor Edwards.